It's not every day that an Englishman is asked to attack Paris, but strangely, it was an attack the French government and people welcomed. By early spring 1942, Paris had been under German occupation for nearly 2 years. Its citizens were fed up, and Germans continually reminded the Parisians who was in charge by holding a military parade each afternoon along the Champs-Élysées, that famous boulevard that leads to the Arc de Triomphe. The parade would end at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier below the Arc de Triomphe, the most sacred place to memorialize France's war dead. An officer from Britain's Special Operations Executive, the SOE, its wartime sabotage and espionage organization in occupied France, provided details of the daily parade to London. At the Air Ministry, Air Marshal Joubert de la Ferté, the French-sounding British commanding officer of Coastal Command, thought one of his Bristol Beaufighters might be able to disrupt the Germans' parade, striking a blow for French and Allied morale. It might prick the balloon of German pomposity and show Paris that the Allies were working hard for its liberation. The Bristol Beaufighter was a 2-engine multi-role aircraft, heavily armed and with a crew of 2. Coastal Command employed them shooting up German ships and dropping torpedoes. Just a single Beaufighter would be sent flying all the way to Paris at just 30 to 50 feet off the deck. A crew would have to be found who could pull off such an audacious stunt. The operation was codenamed Squabble, and Flight Lieutenant Ken Gatwood, 27, of No. 236 Squadron, was selected to pilot the aircraft with Navigator Flight Sergeant Gilbert Fern. The plan was, to say the least, ambitious. Gatwood was to hammer across the English Channel at wave-top height, then flog his Beaufighter across the French countryside at rooftop altitude to Paris. Then he would blast down the Champs-Élysées, machine-gun the Germans' daily parade, and then bomb the Arc de Triomphe. Gatwood would not drop explosives. Instead, a specially weighted French tricolour flag would be dropped on the Arc de Triomphe. Next, Gatwood was to fly across the Place de la Concorde and shoot up German naval headquarters in the Ministry de la Marine building, dropping a second tricolour before flying home for tea and medals. So not too difficult a mission. Well, though experienced, Gatwood and Fern spent a few days practicing dropping the flags out of the Beaufighter's flare chutes and shooting up ground targets. The first attempt to mount Operation Squabble on the 13th of May 1942 was cancelled due to bad weather. Gatwood tried again 3 times in early June, but each time had to cancel due to the wrong weather conditions. Eventually, on the 12th of June 1942, Gatwood and Fern launched again. They crossed the English Channel from near Portsmouth to Fécamp in France in 29 minutes. They flew southeast, following the Seine towards Paris at just 30 feet. They saw the Eiffel Tower from 30 miles away, but frightened birds caused a problem. A crow flew into the starboard engine's air cooler, causing the engine's temperature to rocket, but Gatwood proceeded on, and eventually the bird's remains fell out and the temperature reduced. Hammering low over the rooftops of the city, Gatwood passed the Eiffel Tower and banked steeply to port around it, heading northwest. He increased altitude slightly to see the Arc de Triomphe in the distance. People in the streets below cheered and waved as they saw the British aircraft fly over. Fern was ready to drop the first flag. Gatwood turned again and lined up on the massive monument. As the Beaufighter flew over it, Fern released the flag, the weighted tricolour opening in the air and drifting down to land close to the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. Dropping to 40 feet, Gatwood belted down the Champs-Élysées, but for some reason the expected parade of German troops was not there. Flying down the wide boulevard just below rooftop height, Fern readied the second flag. Fern was also documenting the mission with a black and white stills camera. At this point, some light 20mm flak opened up, firing from some of the rooftops, some tracer flashing past the Beaufighter, but doing no injury. Entering the Place de la Concorde, Gatwood hauled the Beaufighter around 270 degrees and lined up on the German naval headquarters. He depressed his gun button, hosing the building down with his 4 20mm cannons, before passing overhead, Fern releasing the second French tricolour which fluttered down to land on the building. Gatwood and Fern flew on, low, out of Paris, mission accomplished. They landed at RAF Northolt in London without incident. Gatwood received an immediate Distinguished Flying Cross and Fern the Distinguished Flying Medal, and he was made an officer. Both men survived the war, Gatwood passing away in 1998, aged 84, and Fern in 2010. Operation Squabble was a resounding success, raising morale on both sides of the English Channel. But morale was raised most of all in Paris, the City of Light. Gatwood's Beaufighter attack showed the people that they were not forgotten, and liberation would one day come. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, share, and help support my channel at PayPal and Patreon. Details in the description box below.